In the busy heart of New York City stood one of the grandest mansions people had ever seen. It belonged to Richard Lawson, a man everyone knew as a billionaire businessman, the owner of several powerful companies. He was a man who had everything: money, fame, respect. But very few people knew what his home was truly like behind those golden gates. Richard lived there with his wife, Margaret, and their only son, Ethan. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family. Smiling faces in magazines, attending charity events, and hosting big parties for politicians and movie stars. But inside the walls of that huge mansion, things were not as perfect as they seemed. The house was always filled with silence, and the people who worked there often felt afraid to speak too much. Among the few people who truly knew the family's secrets was Clara, the family maid. She had been working for the Lawsons for almost 18 years. She was quiet, polite, and hardworking. Everyone in the house knew she was loyal and trustworthy. Over the years, Clara had seen the family's happiness, their fights, and their strange ways of keeping secrets from each other. She never asked questions. She knew that in a rich man's house, curiosity could cost you your job. Clara lived in a small staff apartment at the back of the mansion with her teenage daughter, Lila. Her husband had died when Lila was a child, and the Lawsons had allowed Clara to keep her daughter with her since she had no one else. Lila had grown up seeing the glittering world of the rich, but from a distance. She knew how to be invisible, moving quietly through the halls, studying while her mother worked, and helping with small chores after school. Though Lila didn't have much, she was bright and kind. She loved watching people and noticed things others often missed. Sometimes she wondered how people who had everything could still look so unhappy. She would see Mrs. Lawson staring out the window for hours or Mr. Lawson shouting on phone calls late at night. Even their son, Ethan, seemed lonely despite having all the luxuries anyone could dream of. Ethan Lawson was 24, tall and gentle in nature. He was different from his parents, more kind-hearted and humble. He often thanked Clara for her work and smiled at Lila whenever he passed her in the hallways. He had recently finished his degree in business but wasn't interested in his father's companies. Instead, he wanted to start his own charity organization to help orphans. That dream made his parents unhappy, especially his mother, Margaret. She wanted Ethan to take control of the family empire, not waste time helping the poor. For months, Ethan had not been feeling well. He suffered from strange dizzy spells, weakness, and moments when his heart raced too fast. Doctors were called and medicine after medicine was prescribed, but his health only got worse. Clara and Lila both noticed the change in him. His once bright eyes now looked tired and he had lost weight. Whenever Clara expressed her concern, Mrs. Lawson would quickly shut her down, saying, "Everything is under control. You just focus on your work." There was something about Mrs. Lawson that always made people nervous. She was beautiful, elegant, and powerful, but cold. Her smile never reached her eyes. She controlled every part of the house, the staff, the schedules, and especially Ethan's care. No one was allowed to bring him food or medicine except her. She claimed she didn't trust anyone else to do it right. Clara found this strange but never questioned it aloud. One evening, while Clara was polishing the dining table, she heard Richard Lawson and his wife arguing in the next room. Their voices were low but tense. "You can't hide this forever, Margaret," Richard said. "I'm not hiding anything," she replied sharply. "I'm protecting what's ours." Clara froze for a moment, her hands trembling. She quietly stepped away, pretending she hadn't heard anything. That night, as she tucked Lila into bed, Clara looked worried. Lila asked softly, "Mom, is everything okay?" Clara smiled weakly. "Yes, sweetheart. Just tired. Big houses come with big problems." Lila nodded, but she could see the concern in her mother's eyes. She knew her mother only looked that way when something serious was happening. As days passed, Lila began noticing small, unusual things. The cook complained that Mrs. Lawson had changed Ethan's diet completely. The family doctor came less often now, and whenever he did, he only spoke privately with Mrs. Lawson. Even more strange, Clara told her that the new medicine bottles were always locked in Mrs. Lawson's cabinet and no one else could touch them. One afternoon, while helping her mother dust the main hallway, Lila accidentally passed Ethan's open bedroom door. She saw him lying pale on the bed, his hands shaking slightly. On the nightstand beside him was a small brown bottle with a white label. She couldn't read the words clearly, but something about it felt off. She didn't say anything, but her sharp eyes remembered the color and the strange smell that hung faintly in the air. Outside, the world saw the Lawsons as powerful and untouchable. But inside the mansion, shadows were growing, of secrets, sickness, and fear. Lila didn't know it yet, but soon, her quiet curiosity and courage would uncover something that even the richest people in the city couldn't hide. And it would all begin with one small moment, when she looked at Ethan's medicine and realized something was terribly wrong. Ethan Lawson's condition was getting worse with every passing day. He had once been full of life, always smiling, always kind to everyone in the house. But now his skin looked pale, his eyes seemed tired, and he could barely walk without help. The house that once echoed with laughter and music now felt quiet and heavy, like something dark was hiding in its corners. Clara, the maid who had worked for the Lawsons for almost 2 decades, noticed every change. She could see how weak Ethan had become, and she often heard him coughing late at night. Sometimes, when she passed his room in the morning, she would see the tray of untouched food outside his door. It worried her deeply. Clara had raised her own daughter, Lila, inside this house. And because Lila was smart and observant, she too noticed how things were changing. "Mom," she whispered one evening while helping Clara fold the laundry. "Ethan looks really sick. Doesn't he go to the hospital?" Clara sighed. "He does, dear. But his mother says the doctors are already handling it." She hesitated before continuing. "Still, something doesn't feel right." Mrs. Margaret Lawson had always been a strict woman. She didn't like when the staff asked questions, especially about her son. Since Ethan fell sick, she became even more controlling. Every morning, she personally brought him his medicine. She didn't let anyone else touch it, not even Clara. When the cook tried to take food up to him once, Mrs. Lawson stopped her sharply and said, "I will take care of my son myself." No one dared to question her after that. But Clara couldn't ignore the strange feeling in her heart. She had seen many illnesses in her life, but she had never seen anyone get weaker so quickly, even after taking expensive medicines. She started to suspect that something about Ethan's treatment wasn't right. One afternoon, while cleaning the study room, Clara noticed a small brown bottle left on the desk. She recognized it. It was the same kind of bottle Mrs. Lawson carried every morning to Ethan's room. Out of habit, she went to pick it up to dust the table, but the moment she opened the cap, a strong chemical smell hit her nose. It didn't smell like regular medicine. It smelled sharp and bitter, almost like something that should not be swallowed. Clara quickly closed the cap and put it back where it was, her hands trembling slightly. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the smell, about Ethan's pale face, and about Mrs. Lawson's cold expression whenever someone mentioned the illness. Still, she told herself not to interfere. "This isn't your business," she whispered to herself. "You need this job. Stay quiet." But Lila, who had inherited her mother's sharp eyes and brave heart, wasn't so easily convinced. One day, while helping her mother dust Ethan's room, she saw him lying weakly on the bed. He tried to sit up and smiled at her. "Thank you, Lila," he said softly. "You and your mom keep this house running better than anyone." His voice was kind, but it was also filled with pain. On the small table beside his bed sat the same brown bottle. Lila looked at it carefully. The label was partly peeled off, but she could read the words, "For laboratory use only." Her eyes widened. She had seen that exact label once before in a cabinet downstairs where cleaning supplies and chemicals were stored. Ethan noticed her looking and asked gently, "What's wrong?" Lila shook her head quickly. "Nothing, sir. Just cleaning." But inside, her heart began to race. She wanted to say something, but her throat went dry. Later, she told her mother what she had seen. Clara froze. "Are you sure?" she asked in a whisper. "Yes, Mom," it said. "For laboratory use only." "That's not medicine, is it?" Clara didn't know what to say. She was torn between fear and responsibility. She knew that if she accused Mrs. Lawson of anything without proof, she could lose her job, or worse, be blamed for something she didn't do. But if she said nothing, Ethan's condition might become even more serious. That night, while serving dinner, Clara noticed how distant Mr. Lawson looked. He sat quietly at the table, barely touching his food. Mrs. Lawson, on the other hand, acted as if everything was perfectly fine. She smiled politely and talked about an upcoming charity event. It was strange how calm she was while her only son was lying upstairs, struggling to stay awake through his pain. After dinner, Clara saw Mrs. Lawson carefully mixing something into a glass of juice. When their eyes met, Margaret smiled coldly. "This is for Ethan. The doctor said it helps him sleep better." Clara nodded silently, but her stomach turned. Something about that smile felt wrong, forced, fake, almost evil. She wanted to follow Mrs. Lawson upstairs, to see what she gave her son, but her fear held her back. She stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, listening to the faint sound of footsteps fading toward Ethan's room. When Mrs. Lawson came back down, she said in a calm voice, "He's finally resting." Then she looked at Clara sharply and added, "Make sure no one goes into his room until morning." Clara bowed her head respectfully, but her mind was racing. Lila watched all this quietly from the hallway. Something inside her told her that this was not just about medicine or sickness. There was a secret in this house, something big and dangerous. As the night grew darker, Lila sat by the window in their small room, staring at the lights of the mansion. Her mother was trying to sleep, but Lila couldn't close her eyes. She kept thinking about the label on that bottle, about the smell, about Ethan's fading voice. She whispered to herself, "Something's wrong, and I'll find out what it is." Neither she nor her mother knew it yet, but the truth they were about to uncover would shake the entire Lawson family and expose a secret worth $75 million. The next few days in the Lawson mansion felt strange. The air was thick with tension that no one dared to speak about. Everyone worked quietly, afraid to do something that might upset Mrs. Lawson. She had become more watchful than ever, walking through the halls with sharp eyes, as if she knew someone was observing her. Clara tried her best to stay calm, but she couldn't stop worrying about Ethan. Every time she saw him, he looked weaker. His hands trembled when he tried to hold a cup, and sometimes he seemed too tired to even speak. Still, whenever Clara asked if he needed help, he would smile faintly and say, "I'll be fine." But the truth was written all over his face. He was not fine at all. Lila, too, couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. The words on that bottle, "For laboratory use only," those words haunted her every night. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she didn't have proof strong enough to confront anyone. She was just the maid's daughter. No one would believe her. Still, she couldn't ignore her instincts. One afternoon, while Mrs. Lawson was out visiting her lawyer, Lila was helping Clara tidy up the living room. As she dusted the bookshelves, she noticed a drawer slightly open. Inside, she saw several documents with Ethan's name on them. One of the papers caught her attention. It had the title Inheritance Trust Agreement. Lila had no idea what those words meant, but she knew inheritance had something to do with money or property. She carefully placed everything back where it was, but now her curiosity had grown even stronger. Later that evening, Mrs. Lawson returned, looking unusually anxious. She went straight to the study and called someone on the phone. Lila happened to be in the hallway nearby, arranging flowers. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when she heard Ethan's name, her hands froze. "I don't care what the doctor says," Mrs. Lawson said in a low, cold voice. "The inheritance must be transferred before he turns 25. You understand that, don't you?" The voice on the other end was muffled, but Lila could make out a few words. "It's risky. The documents? His signature." "I'll handle it," Mrs. Lawson snapped before ending the call. Lila's heart pounded. She didn't understand everything, but one thing was clear. Mrs. Lawson was planning something about Ethan's money. She remembered how Mrs. Lawson always brought the medicine herself, how she refused to let anyone else help. Could she be doing something to Ethan on purpose? That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, her mind racing. Finally, she whispered, "Mom, what if Mrs. Lawson is hiding something about Ethan?" Clara, half asleep, opened her eyes slowly. "Lila, stop imagining things. You'll get us in trouble." "But, Mom, I heard her talking to someone about Ethan's inheritance. And she's the only one who gives him medicine. What if that medicine is not helping him at all?" Clara sat up, her face pale. She wanted to tell her daughter she was wrong. But deep inside, she feared Lila might be right. Everything strange that had happened suddenly started to make sense. The hidden bottles, the strong smell, the locked cabinet, Mrs. Lawson's cold behavior. Still, Clara whispered, "We have no proof. Be careful what you say. If anyone hears you, we could both lose everything." The next morning, Ethan asked Clara to bring him some water. When she entered his room, she found him sitting by the window, staring out at the garden. His eyes were dull, but there was a hint of sadness in them. "Clara," he said softly, "do you think I'll get better?" Her heart broke hearing that question. She smiled weakly and said, "Of course, sir. You just need rest and faith." He smiled back but didn't seem convinced. Then, without warning, Mrs. Lawson walked in carrying a tray. On it was a small cup of medicine and some fruit juice. She frowned when she saw Clara there. "You may leave," she said curtly. "I'll take it from here." Clara lowered her head and left, but she stayed just outside the door, pretending to arrange flowers on a nearby table. Through the small gap, she saw Mrs. Lawson hand Ethan the cup. "Drink this," she said gently, though her tone lacked warmth. Ethan hesitated for a second but obeyed. As he swallowed the liquid, his face twisted in discomfort. "It tastes strange," he murmured. Mrs. Lawson smiled faintly. "Medicine always does." That moment burned into Clara's mind. Something about that exchange felt deeply wrong. Later that day, when Mrs. Lawson went out again, Lila sneaked into Ethan's room to dust. She noticed the same medicine bottle on his nightstand. This time, she looked closely at the label. It was identical to the one she'd seen before. Same size, same color, same warning sign. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The door suddenly opened, and Clara rushed in, whispering harshly, "Lila, what are you doing?" Lila quickly hid the bottle behind her back. "Mom, look at this label. It's not real medicine. This is what Mrs. Lawson gives Ethan every day." Clara's heart pounded. She took the bottle and read the small print. There it was again. For laboratory use only. A chill ran down her spine. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is she giving him?" Just then they heard footsteps. Mrs. Lawson's voice echoed down the hall. "Clara? Where are you?" In a panic, Clara shoved the bottle back on the table and pulled Lila out of the room. They ran to the kitchen, pretending to clean. Mrs. Lawson appeared moments later, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Were either of you upstairs just now?" Clara forced a calm smile. "Yes, ma'am. I was checking if Ethan needed anything." Mrs. Lawson narrowed her eyes but said nothing. After a long pause, she turned and left. As soon as she was gone, Lila whispered, "Mom, she's up to something terrible. I can feel it." Clara placed a trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You're right," she said quietly. "But if we're not careful, we might be the next ones in trouble." From that moment, both mother and daughter knew. They were living in a house full of secrets, and one wrong step could destroy them all. But Lila also knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stay silent. She had seen enough to know that something evil was happening, and she was determined to find out what Mrs. Lawson was hiding. Soon, she would uncover the truth, something that would shake the entire Lawson family and change their lives forever. The morning was quiet in the Lawson mansion, too quiet. The sun's light fell softly through the tall windows, but even the golden rays could not brighten the tension that filled the house. Ethan was growing weaker each day, and everyone could see it. His once lively eyes now looked tired and dull. He could hardly stand, and sometimes he would fall asleep in the middle of talking. Clara worried deeply, and Lila couldn't get rid of the heavy feeling in her heart. That day, Mrs. Lawson seemed unusually calm. She moved through the halls with a cold smile and carried a silver tray in her hands. On it sat Ethan's morning medicine, the same brown bottle that had begun to haunt both Clara and Lila. She walked into her son's room, closing the door behind her. Lila was in the corridor, dusting the nearby shelves, and Clara was cleaning the next room. When Mrs. Lawson entered Ethan's room, both of them stopped what they were doing. Lila leaned slightly to peek through the half-open door. She could see Mrs. Lawson standing beside the bed, pouring a small spoon of medicine and offering it to Ethan. "Drink this, sweetheart," Mrs. Lawson said softly, though her tone sounded strange. Too calm, too controlled. Ethan sighed weakly and obeyed. He trusted his mother completely. But the moment he swallowed the liquid, his face tightened in pain. "It tastes bitter, different from yesterday," he murmured. Mrs. Lawson smiled slightly. "It's a new dose. The doctor said it will help more quickly." She set the bottle back on the nightstand, wiped her hands carefully, and left the room without another word. Lila felt her chest tighten. Something about the scene didn't feel right. The moment Mrs. Lawson disappeared down the hall, she stepped quietly into Ethan's room. He looked pale and was breathing heavily. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked softly. Ethan tried to smile but could barely speak. "I don't feel good," he whispered. Clara rushed in behind her daughter. "Mr. Ethan, what's happening?" She placed a hand on his forehead. It was hot, and his skin was damp with sweat. Then Lila's eyes went to the small brown bottle on the nightstand. She picked it up carefully, and when she read the label, her heart stopped. The words were the same, for laboratory use only, the exact same kind she had seen before. Her voice came out in a panic. "That's not your medicine," she cried. Her words echoed in the room, sharp and loud. Ethan looked at her in confusion, and Clara gasped, realizing what her daughter had just said. "Lila," Clara whispered urgently, her face pale. "Put that down." But it was too late. Mrs. Lawson had heard the shout and came rushing back into the room. Her eyes flashed with anger. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Lila's hands trembled as she held up the bottle. "This isn't real medicine, ma'am. This says, for laboratory use only. Why are you giving this to him?" For a moment, silence filled the room. Even Mrs. Lawson froze. Then, in a cold, slow voice, she said, "You have no idea what you're talking about. That bottle is old, it's just the container. You are a child. You know nothing." But her voice cracked ever so slightly, and Lila noticed. Clara stepped in front of her daughter protectively. "Ma'am, please, we're just worried. Mr. Ethan doesn't look well, and we—" "Enough!" Mrs. Lawson shouted. "Get out of this room right now." Her scream was so loud that even the butler and the cook came running down the hall. Mrs. Lawson turned on them too. "Everyone out. No one is to enter this room again without my permission." Clara grabbed Lila's hand and pulled her away, her heart beating fast. They went straight to the kitchen, both shaken. Lila's eyes were wet with tears. "Mom, I didn't mean to shout, but I couldn't stay quiet. She's poisoning him. I'm sure of it." Clara hugged her tightly, whispering, "I know, my child, I know, but we have to be careful now. She's dangerous." Upstairs, Mrs. Lawson sat beside her son's bed, staring at the bottle on the nightstand. Her hands shook slightly as she picked it up. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, not the servants, and definitely not the maid's young daughter. "Stupid girl," she muttered under her breath. But what she didn't realize was that her plan was already starting to fall apart. That evening, when Mr. Richard Lawson came home from a business meeting, he noticed the strange silence. Usually, Ethan would at least greet him with a smile. But today, no one came downstairs. When he asked the staff, they all looked nervous. Clara hesitated, then said quietly, "Sir, Ethan isn't feeling well. Mrs. Lawson won't allow anyone to see him." Richard frowned. "Won't allow anyone?" He marched straight upstairs. When he entered Ethan's room, he was shocked to see his son lying weakly, barely conscious. "Margaret, what's going on here?" he demanded. Mrs. Lawson tried to smile. "He's just resting. The doctor said he needs peace and quiet." Richard looked around the room and noticed the small brown bottle. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing. "What is this?" he asked. Mrs. Lawson hesitated. "It's his medicine." "Why?" Richard turned the bottle slowly in his hand. His voice was low but full of anger. "This isn't medicine, Margaret. This is a chemical compound. I've seen this label before. It's used in laboratories, not hospitals." Her face went pale. For the first time, she couldn't speak. Richard called for the family doctor immediately. The doctor arrived within the hour, examined Ethan, and looked deeply concerned. "Mr. Lawson, I need to run some tests," he said. "Something is not right here." While they waited, Lila and Clara stood quietly near the kitchen, praying. Lila felt scared, guilty even, but her mother held her hand and whispered, "You did the right thing. You might have saved his life." Late that night, the doctor returned with the results. "Mr. Lawson," he said gravely, "your son has been taking a harmful substance. This is not a prescribed medicine. If this continued for a few more days, it could have been fatal." The truth hit the house like a storm. Mrs. Lawson stood frozen, her face drained of color. Richard's voice was cold and furious. "Margaret, what have you done?" But before anyone could answer, Lila peeked from the hall and saw the billionaire she'd known for years, now broken, betrayed, and terrified for his only son. That one brave moment, when she shouted, "That's not your medicine," had changed everything. It had saved a life and opened the door to a secret no one in the world could have imagined. The night after the truth began to come out was the longest night the Lawson mansion had ever seen. The once bright house was now silent and cold, filled with whispers, fear, and shock. Everyone on the staff stayed awake, unsure of what would happen next. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, holding Lila's hand tightly. Her daughter's brave words had started something huge, something that could not be hidden anymore. Upstairs, in Ethan's room, the doctor stayed with him the entire night. Richard Lawson, the billionaire father, stood by his son's bedside, his face pale and tired. He kept looking at his son and then at the small brown bottle on the table. That tiny bottle, something he had never paid attention to before, now looked like the most dangerous thing in the world. When the doctor finally came out of the room, Richard rushed to him. "Tell me the truth, doctor. What was in that medicine?" The doctor hesitated, looking both shocked and angry. "Mr. Lawson, that was not medicine. The liquid inside contained traces of chemicals that should never be swallowed. If your son had continued taking it, it would have damaged his organs completely. It's a miracle he's still alive." Richard felt the floor slip beneath his feet. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You mean someone gave this to him on purpose?" The doctor nodded slowly. "Yes, someone must have replaced his real medicine with this. Whoever did it wanted to harm him." Richard's face darkened. There was only one person who had complete control over Ethan's medicine: his wife, Margaret. He turned toward his bedroom and found her standing near the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look calm. "Margaret," he said quietly, his voice shaking with rage. "Tell me this isn't true." She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this to our own son?" Her expression changed. The calm mask she wore for years started to crack. "You don't understand," she said sharply. "You've always loved him more than anything. You would have given him everything and left me with nothing. I couldn't let that happen." Richard stared at her in disbelief. "You're talking about money? About inheritance? Margaret, he's your son." Tears of anger and guilt filled her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "He was supposed to be sick, not dying. My brother said it would only make him weak long enough for the inheritance to pass through my name. But then—" She stopped mid-sentence, realizing what she had just confessed. Richard stepped back, horrified. "Your brother? You mean Peter? You both planned this?" She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Peter said we could transfer the funds quietly before Ethan's 25th birthday. He said once the papers were signed, we could move everything into a private account. He promised it would be simple. Richard's hands clenched. His voice turned cold. You tried to steal $75 million by poisoning our son? Margaret finally broke down, falling to her knees. I didn't mean to kill him, Richard. I was desperate. You were going to leave everything to him. You were going to shut me out. I didn't want to lose my life. But Richard didn't respond. He turned away, his heart shattered. The woman he had trusted for years, the mother of his child, had been slowly killing their son for money. Downstairs, Clara and Lila waited anxiously. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but the sound of shouting echoed faintly through the mansion. Lila squeezed her mother's hand. Mom, did we do the right thing? Clara hugged her close. Yes, my dear. You saved a life. That's all that matters. Moments later, Richard came down the stairs, his face pale and full of pain. He looked at Clara, then at Lila. It was you, he said softly. You stopped her. You saved my son. Clara lowered her head respectfully. Sir, we only did what was right. Richard shook his head slowly. No. You did what no one else had the courage to do. He looked around the hall, his voice shaking slightly. Call the police. Within an hour, 2 police cars arrived at the mansion. The flashing blue lights made the place look even colder. Mrs. Lawson was taken away quietly, her face blank and eyes empty. As she passed Lila and Clara, she glared at them with hate, but neither of them flinched. Ethan was still unconscious upstairs, fighting to recover. The doctor said he would survive but needed time and care. Richard sat beside his son all night, holding his hand, whispering apologies for not seeing the truth sooner. The next morning, the story spread like fire. News reporters crowded outside the mansion, and headlines appeared everywhere. Billionaire's wife arrested in $75 million inheritance plot. Maid's daughter saves billionaire's son from poisoning. People couldn't stop talking about it. Everyone wanted to know about the brave young girl who had spoken up when no one else dared to. Inside the mansion, Clara looked at her daughter with pride. You were brave, Lila. I don't think I could have done what you did. Lila smiled softly. I didn't think. I just said what I saw. I couldn't stay quiet when someone was dying. Richard later called them both into his study. He looked tired but grateful. I owe you both my deepest thanks, he said. You've not only saved my son, you've saved this family from something far worse. I promise you, you'll never have to worry about your future again. He offered to send Lila to the best school in the city and gave Clara a permanent position managing the household staff with double pay. But more than the rewards, what truly mattered to them was that justice had been done. That night, as Lila looked out of her window, she saw the lights of the city shining far away. She whispered softly, He'll get better. Everything will be okay now. Clara smiled from her bed. Yes, my love. The truth always wins in the end. They didn't know yet that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. For Ethan, for Richard, and for the 2 women whose courage had uncovered the biggest secret the Lawson family had ever tried to hide. Days passed after Margaret Lawson's arrest, but the tension in the Lawson mansion still lingered like a heavy cloud. The news had shaken everyone. Reporters kept camping outside the gates, trying to get a glimpse of the billionaire family at the center of such a shocking scandal. Inside, Ethan was slowly recovering, but his heart was broken. He couldn't believe his own mother had been behind his sickness. Every time he closed his eyes, her face flashed before him, smiling the way she always had, and now he knew that smile had been a lie. Richard Lawson stayed mostly by his son's side. He was a man who had everything: money, power, respect, but now he realized he had failed to protect the one person who mattered the most. The betrayal had cut him deeply. At times, he just sat quietly, staring out the window, wondering how greed could destroy the people he loved most. One afternoon, Clara knocked softly on Ethan's door. Sir, may we come in? She asked politely. Ethan turned his head slowly and managed a faint smile. Of course, Clara. Please come in. Lila followed her mother inside, carrying a tray with soup and juice. She set it down carefully beside his bed. "You should eat something," she said gently. "The doctor said you're getting stronger." Ethan looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you, Lila. You've done more for me than you'll ever know." Lila smiled shyly. "I just told the truth," she said. Her simple words filled the quiet room with warmth. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. "You saved my life," he said softly. "If you hadn't spoken up that day, I might not be here now." Lila shook her head. Anyone would have done the same. But Ethan knew that wasn't true. Nobody else had noticed what she had seen. Nobody else had dared to speak against his powerful family. She was just a maid's daughter, but she had more courage than all of them combined. As the days went by, Ethan's health improved. He started walking short distances, and soon he could sit outside in the garden. Clara and Lila often joined him there, bringing tea or helping with small tasks. Slowly, laughter returned to the mansion. Richard also began spending time with them. One evening, he invited Clara and Lila to dinner in the grand dining hall. It was the first time they had ever sat at the same table as the Lawson family. Clara was nervous, but Richard's tone was kind and warm. "You both are not just staff anymore," he said. "You are part of this family now. You stood for the truth when others hid behind lies." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, we only did what was right. You don't have to thank us." Richard smiled. "It's not just about thanks. I've decided to help Lila continue her education. You mentioned she's bright, right?" Lila's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Yes," Richard said with a smile. "You deserve a chance to build your future. I've arranged for you to attend one of the best schools in the city. Everything, tuition, books, transport, it's all taken care of." Lila couldn't believe her ears. She looked at her mother, who was speechless, tears forming in her eyes. "Sir, we can't accept something so big," Clara said softly. Richard leaned forward. "Clara, you and your daughter saved my son's life. This isn't charity, it's gratitude. You both deserve it." Ethan nodded from across the table. "I agree. Lila deserves every bit of it." From that day on, Lila's life began to change. She started attending her new school, wearing a crisp uniform and carrying new books. The other students looked at her curiously at first, but her kindness and intelligence quickly made her well-liked. Still, she never forgot who she was or where she came from. Every evening, she returned home to help her mother at the mansion. Meanwhile, Richard began working on fixing the damage Margaret had done. Her brother Peter was still on the run, hiding from the authorities. Richard hired private investigators to track him down and recover the stolen funds. It wasn't just about money, it was about restoring justice. One afternoon, while Richard was in his study, his phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Sir, we've located Peter. He's trying to flee the country. The authorities are moving in." Richard let out a deep breath of relief. "Good. Make sure he faces the consequences. I want this chapter closed for good." He hung up and looked at a photo on his desk, an old family picture with Margaret smiling beside him and Ethan as a child. He picked it up slowly, then set it face down. "It's time to start over," he whispered. Later that evening, Ethan joined Lila in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "It feels strange," he said quietly. "Everything's changed. My mother is gone. My family's name is everywhere in the news. I don't even know what normal means anymore." Lila looked at him kindly. "Sometimes, change is painful, but it can make life better too. Maybe this is your chance to start again." He smiled at her words. "You sound wiser than most adults I know." She laughed softly. "Maybe because I've seen how quickly life can change. One truth can change everything." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Then Ethan said, "Lila, when I'm better, I want to do something good with the company. I don't want it to be just about money anymore. My father's business has helped a lot of people, but I want to help more. People like you and your mom. You showed me what real strength looks like." Lila smiled brightly. "That's a good idea. You'll make your father proud." Ethan looked up at the darkening sky. And maybe my mother will see what she almost destroyed. The next morning, the mansion felt lighter. The news came in that Peter had been caught, and all the stolen funds would be returned. For the first time in months, Richard slept peacefully. Ethan began to laugh again. Clara smiled more often. And Lila, she carried herself with quiet confidence, knowing that speaking the truth had changed not only their lives but an entire family's future. The storm had finally passed, but none of them knew that fate still had one more twist waiting for them. One that would test their hearts again before true peace could settle in. A few peaceful weeks passed at the Lawson mansion. The dark days seemed to be behind them now. Margaret was still in custody, Peter had been caught, and the stolen money was being returned. Ethan's health had improved so much that he could now walk around the garden every morning, sometimes even helping the staff with small chores just to feel normal again. Clara continued her work as head housekeeper, and Lila was enjoying her new school. Every evening, she would tell her mother about her classes, her new friends, and how different her life felt now. The mansion, once filled with tension and secrets, had started to feel like a real home. But peace doesn't always last forever. One rainy evening, Richard received a phone call that froze his heart. It was from the prison warden. "Mr. Lawson," the voice said, "I regret to inform you that your wife, Margaret Lawson, has been found unconscious in her cell. She was rushed to the hospital. You should come immediately." Richard couldn't believe what he heard. Unconscious? What happened? "They think it was an overdose," the man replied. "She might not make it through the night." Within minutes, Richard was on his way to the hospital, with Ethan beside him. The drive was silent except for the sound of rain hitting the car windows. Ethan's hands trembled slightly. "Dad? Do you think she did this on purpose?" Richard didn't answer. He stared out the window, his mind full of old memories. Of their wedding day, of when Ethan was born, of all the years before greed and lies tore everything apart. When they arrived, the doctors rushed them to the emergency room. Margaret was lying on the bed, pale and weak, tubes running from her arms. The monitor beeped softly beside her. She looked nothing like the proud, cold woman they once knew. Ethan stood frozen at the door, unable to move. Richard stepped forward slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Margaret!" Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked confused, then her gaze softened. "Richard," she breathed weakly. "You came." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course I came." Tears formed in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt him. I just wanted to be seen. You always looked at Ethan like he was your whole world. I felt invisible." Richard's face tightened with pain. "Margaret, you had everything. You had me, this home, everything I could give. But you chose greed." "I know," she whispered, "and I'll pay for it. I just didn't want to die without saying, I'm sorry." Ethan stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Mom." Her eyes found him, and for the first time in years, her expression was full of real emotion. "Ethan, my boy, I'm so sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but please, live a better life than I did. Don't let money destroy your heart." Tears rolled down Ethan's face. He wanted to be angry, but seeing his mother so broken made that impossible. "I forgive you, Mom," he whispered. "I just wish you had told the truth sooner." A faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes closing slowly. The monitor beeped steadily for a few more seconds, and then it went silent. Ethan cried quietly, and Richard wrapped his arms around his son. For all her sins, Margaret had still been part of their lives, and losing her left a painful emptiness. The next morning, the news spread quickly. Margaret Lawson dies after attempted overdose. Some said it was guilt, others said it was fear. Whatever it was, it marked the end of the dark chapter in the Lawson family's story. After the funeral, Richard decided to make some big changes. "This house has seen too much pain," he told Ethan and Clara. "It's time for something good to come out of all this." He called a meeting with his lawyers and announced the creation of a charity foundation in Margaret's name, one that would help sick children and struggling families. "Maybe this way," he said quietly, Some good can come from all the wrong she did. Ethan supported the idea. He told his father, "It's what Mom wanted in the end. She didn't want her mistakes to be her only legacy." Clara and Lila were also moved by the decision. Richard made Lila part of the Foundation's youth team. "You'll help decide where we focus our projects," he told her. "You've already proved your heart is in the right place." Lila's eyes lit up. "Really, sir? I'd love to help." Ethan smiled at her. "You'll do great. You always do." As weeks passed, the Foundation began helping families across the city. Lila often accompanied Ethan to hospitals and charity events. They spent hours together, planning, laughing, and talking about their dreams. A quiet friendship grew between them, one built not on wealth or class, but on trust and shared kindness. One evening, after returning from an event, Ethan walked Lila and Clara to their cottage behind the mansion. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think people like you and your mother only worked for us, but you've shown me what real strength looks like." Clara smiled. "Sir, we all learn from pain. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters." Ethan nodded. "You're right. And maybe, just maybe, all this happened so we could rebuild something better." Before leaving, he looked at Lila and said, "You changed my life, Lila. You saved me once, but I think you're still saving me every day." Lila blushed slightly, unsure what to say. "You don't have to thank me," she whispered. "I'm not thanking you," he replied with a smile. "I'm just telling the truth." That night, as Lila looked out her window, she saw the lights in the mansion glowing warmly. Life had changed so much, but in her heart, she knew one thing. Honesty had brought light where lies once ruled. But fate, as always, had one final surprise in store. Something that would test the bond they had built and reveal one more truth hidden deep within the Lawson family. Months had passed since Margaret Lawson's death, and life in the Lawson mansion had settled into a calm, peaceful rhythm. The dark shadows that once filled every corner of the house had faded away. Ethan had become more cheerful, spending his days running the family business with honesty and compassion. Richard, too, seemed like a changed man, kinder, humbler, and more open. Clara and Lila had become part of the Lawson family in every way that mattered. The charity foundation they had started in Margaret's name was doing wonders. It was helping poor families, providing medicine to sick children, and even building shelters for women in need. Lila often accompanied Ethan to events, speaking on behalf of the young volunteers. Her simple words and genuine heart always touched people. Wherever she went, she spread warmth and hope. But one day, something unexpected happened, something that would shake their lives once more. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Richard called Ethan to his study. On his desk lay a thick envelope that had arrived earlier that day, marked confidential. Richard looked serious as he handed it to his son. "This came from the hospital," he said. "It's about your mother." Ethan frowned, confused. "But what could it be now? She's gone." "I don't know," Richard said quietly, "but I think you should read it." Ethan slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from the hospital director and a small sealed document. As he read through it, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Dad," he said softly, "this can't be true." Richard took the letter and read it himself. His face turned pale. It says, "The DNA records from the hospital test years ago were mixed up." "Ethan," he stopped, unable to continue. Ethan grabbed the paper back, his hands trembling. "It says I might not be your biological son?" The room went silent. The ticking of the old clock was the only sound. Richard felt his world spinning again. "No, that's impossible. There must be a mistake." The letter explained that a recent audit at the hospital revealed that several DNA samples from old paternity tests had been wrongly labeled. One of those tests belonged to the Lawson family. The report suggested that Ethan's sample might have been switched, with another child born on the same day. Ethan could hardly breathe. "You mean, I might not even be your son?" Richard's voice broke. "Ethan, listen to me. You are my son. No paper can change that. You are the boy I raised, the one I love." But deep inside, Ethan's mind was spinning. His whole life suddenly felt like a lie. He stood up quickly. "I need to know the truth, Dad. I have to find out." That night he couldn't sleep. His thoughts raced about his mother, his father, and everything that had happened. The next morning he told Clara and Lila about the letter. They were shocked. Lila's eyes widened. "But how can that be possible?" "I don't know," Ethan said quietly. "But I have to find out. I need to know who I really am." Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "No matter what you discover, remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about love and the people who stand by you." Lila nodded. "You'll always be Ethan Lawson, no matter what the papers say." Still, Ethan couldn't rest. With his father's approval, he went back to the hospital to do a new DNA test. The waiting days felt endless. Every minute was filled with anxiety. Finally, the call came. Richard and Ethan sat together as the doctor read the results. "Mr. Lawson," the doctor began gently, "we've confirmed that Ethan is not biologically your son." Ethan felt his chest tighten, but before he could speak, the doctor continued. "However, we also discovered something else. The records show that the other child, whose DNA was switched with Ethan's, was born to a woman named Clara James." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Richard looked at Clara's name in shock. Ethan stared at the doctor, his voice barely audible. "Clara? My maid?" "Yes," the doctor said softly. "It means that Ethan and Lila were switched at birth. Lila Lawson is actually your biological daughter." Ethan couldn't move, couldn't speak. The truth hit him like a storm. Lila, the same girl who had saved his life, who had worked in his house, who had become his best friend. All along, she was his real sister. Richard sat down slowly, his hands shaking. "My God. All these years, my daughter was right here under my roof, and I never knew." When they returned to the mansion, everyone was silent. Clara stood in the living room holding Lila close. Ethan looked at her, tears filling his eyes. "You're my sister," he whispered. "All this time, we were connected in a way none of us knew." Lila looked stunned. "Me? A Lawson?" Richard walked over to her, his voice breaking. "Yes, my dear. You're my daughter. You've always belonged here." He hugged her tightly, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I lost so much, but God gave me another chance. This time, I won't waste it." Clara too cried softly. Though the truth was shocking, she felt a deep peace in her heart. "I always knew she was meant for something greater," she said. "Now I understand why." Ethan hugged both of them. "It doesn't change who we are. We're still family, all of us." From that day, the mansion became a symbol of healing and second chances. Lila took her rightful place as Richard's daughter, but she never forgot her humble roots. Clara stayed on, not as a maid anymore, but as someone deeply respected and loved. Ethan continued his work at the foundation, often saying, "It took losing everything to find what truly mattered." The story of the Lawson family became one people would talk about for years. A tale of lies, love, truth, and forgiveness. And every night, when Lila looked out of her window at the stars, she remembered the words that had changed everything. "That's not your medicine." Those 5 simple words had saved a life, exposed a secret, and finally revealed the truth about who she really was. The storm was over at last, and peace, real peace, finally lived in the Lawson mansion.